So this story that you published was really interesting to me because it was one of the most comprehensive looks that we've seen into everything that Stargate has been through since its inception early last year. And what I want to do is I want to walk people through the timeline of all of these developments. And before we do that, I just want you to tell us very quickly, where is Stargate at today? Let's just get that on the table.
Sure. So today, if you're hearing the word Stargate, it refers to any of OpenAI's many plans to secure compute capacity.
Okay. Just OpenAI. It's solely their effort to get all their compute efforts.
Yeah, OpenAI uses the word Stargate to refer to their all of their efforts to secure compute. But as I'm sure we'll talk about, it started out as something very different.
Okay, so today it's OpenAI. Let's rewind now. January 2025, we have the big White House announcement. It was Donald Trump standing next to Larry Ellison, Masayoshi Son, Sam Altman. We're going to do all this compute in the U.S. What was it supposed to be, and what happened?
Yeah, so those three executives made this giant proclamation to the world that they were launching Stargate, which was supposed to be a joint venture between Oracle, SoftBank, and OpenAI. And the big headline numbers were, an investment of 500 billion for 10 gigawatts of data center capacity. And they were planning to do that in the following years. So that was the big announcement, and then the joint venture was supposed to go and pursue that vision. And as we learned in talking to people who were involved in the effort, that is not exactly what took place after that White House announcement.
What took place then? What happened?
So those three companies, Oracle, SoftBank, and OpenAI, had to come to the table and figure out how are they actually going to structure this effort. The announcement itself had come together within a matter of days. It was kind of cobbled together, and then they had to figure out what is this joint venture, who has ownership of it, how is this joint venture going to control data centers? Inside OpenAI, they had a few visions for what the Stargate was going to be. One of those options that we reported was they were thinking about spinning out Stargate as a separate entity. And employees who work on Stargate today at OpenAI were, they kind of thought that they might be going to that separate entity. OpenAI also thought that Stargate could just be a financing vehicle where, it's a separate, structure that investors could invest in, and the money would go solely toward OpenAI data centers. Um, but the three parties were not, they did create this LLC, but in terms of like actual projects, they did not pursue any. So Oracle, OpenAI, SoftBank, all were kind of scouting, sites in the US to find out where might we actually want to build these data centers. But that work, importantly, was happening in like a disjointed way. OpenAI would visit a site, Oracle would visit a site, and they couldn't really give developers a clear answer on who was going to be doing what.
And I just want to make something clear though. I mean, at the outset though, I mean, was all this these 10 gigawatts of compute? I mean, all of these players were involved in the effort. Was this all to be used by OpenAI even at the outset?
For sure. It was for OpenAI's
Okay.
compute capacity. I mean, we've reported a little bit on OpenAI's plans to maybe sell computing in the future if it has extra, but yeah, it was all for OpenAI. This was, OpenAI's answer to how do we get enough compute because they couldn't get enough from Microsoft at the time.
Okay. So we have these sort of disjoint efforts here, visiting sites. Ultimately, what you reported in your story is that OpenAI then decided they were going to do this on their own, then without the partners at some point.
Yeah, OpenAI expected that a large portion of the 10 gigawatts would be owned and operated data centers, and they weren't sure where Oracle or SoftBank would play in that. But as we reported in the spring, OpenAI realized that it would be very hard for it to itself raise billions of dollars to build out a data center. It's as we've noted in several different projects, the way to secure the best project financing is to have an investment grade tenant. And so in the spring, the Stargate team at OpenAI ended up having another meeting with Oracle, the executive team. And they said, look, what if we actually did, 4.5 gigawatts together instead of, what we're currently doing, which is, a project by project conversation. And so OpenAI told Oracle, let's do 4.5 gigawatts together. And one benefit was that, they both viewed that by doing a large 4.5 gigawatt deal, they could kind of spread out the risk that projects might get delayed or they would come online at different times and they could sort of play around with different timelines. So that's kind of how they came to the idea that they would do one massive 4.5 gigawatt deal.
So this was OpenAI saying, "Hey, it's a little disorganized here at the start. We think maybe we can build these data centers on our own." They go out, they try to pull together some kind of an effort, and then they decide this is too big a lift, and then they come right back to Oracle and the original parties with Stargate, and they say, maybe let's not start with 10 gigawatts. Let's go to 4.5. And so now we're sort of back at sort of a smaller version of what the original Stargate was supposed to be.
Yeah, essentially, I think, 4.5 is still a really large number,
You're
and
right.
they were signing, other compute deals as well. But yeah, there was the decision to go to Oracle for the 4.5, and then at the same time, OpenAI, still wanted to do its own data centers. So they were still at that time, as we get to 10 gigawatts, like what can we do on our own?
Okay, so they haven't given up that idea of doing data centers on their own entirely. They've just said we can't only do that. We have to lean on Stargate to some extent to get this compute.
That's right.
Okay, so now they're dual tracking it. They're saying we're doing Stargate, we're doing our own data centers. Timelines for this are still fuzzy. Do we have any updated timelines on when we're expecting any of these data centers to be constructed, or are they being built right now?
I mean, in total, this is a multi-year effort. And so Stargate, ideally, was kind of timed to President Trump's term. But yeah, you're right. They have all these things going on at the same time. And after that big Oracle deal, then they started working with SoftBank on another kind of data center relationship. So lots of moving parts. But yeah, to your question, this kind of capacity, even though it's committed, and they're working on contracts for it. It is not yet deployed.
Okay. Now tell me, what is the net impact of all of these disjointed efforts? Maybe not disjointed, maybe they're coordinated now. It's kind of hard to tell who's talking to who, but clearly there's something happening. What's the net impact on the product roadmap that OpenAI has, and then ultimately its finances? Because all of this was in pursuit eventually of generating free cash flow, and we know that revenue hasn't really been the problem. How are the two tied?
Yeah, I mean, what we found in our reporting, which I think is widely known, is that OpenAI's revenue is quite tied to compute, and their ability to train advanced models is also directly tied to how much compute they have. And so, I think it's fair to say that as Stargate kind of dragged on last year and they were pursuing multiple different ideas, that did cost them some time. One thing we did report was that by the end of 2025, they were supposed to have 10 gigawatts with Oracle and SoftBank, and they had 7.5. Now, 7.5 is still many, many gigawatts. And so, it's hard to say that that's a bad thing, but I think the time it took to figure this out, they were as we reported, they were scrambling to sign deals with other companies like Amazon and Google. And so I think on the whole, OpenAI still has access to a lot of compute, and they got very close to that 10 gigawatts. But every company in this space is constrained by compute. So I'm sure that OpenAI competitors like Anthropic will be studying the playbook and trying to make sure that they can do the same thing very quickly.
And so, what should we be watching for here in terms of this story moving forward? Should we be watching for the data center developers to make announcements saying, "Hey, we've got 1, 2, 3 gigabytes, gigawatts, gigawatts up and running"? Is it going to be OpenAI saying, "Hey, we've secured this amount of finance"? I mean, we know they're raising funding, but what should we be looking for?
Yeah, I think one thing that I'll be looking for in particular is how OpenAI decides to structure some of the chip purchase agreements. Because on that 4.5 gigawatts, Oracle has already signaled to investors that it might not be on the hook itself to buy the chips. Its customer might bring its own chips, or there could be interesting leasing arrangements. So this is just kind of a scale we haven't seen before. And so I'm sure that OpenAI will be, talking to NVIDIA, talking to Oracle about some creative way to structure the financing side of things because, you know, that many gigawatts is going to require hundreds of billions of dollars on chips and other data center infrastructure. So we'll be very interested to see what happens on the financing side in the future.
Great. Anissa, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Anissa Gardizy, our cloud and compute reporter here at The Information.